Welcome to Sexpertise. I'm your host and favorite sexpert, 𝘸𝘪𝘴𝘪𝘴𝘰. Today, we're talking about something a lot of people feel in their relationships, but don't always know how to articulate, and that's the effort gap. It's that experience of feeling like you're the one holding things together, while the other person just exists in the relationship. If you've ever felt like you're giving more than you're receiving, or questioning whether things are truly balanced, this episode is going to give you some clarity. So let's get into it. A lot of people have experienced this feeling in a relationship that they're doing more than the other person. They're the one initiating conversations, making plans, checking in, and trying to keep the connection alive. Over time, that dynamic starts to feel unbalanced. Even if nothing is technically wrong, that's what we're going to talk about today. This is what I call the effort gap. It's when one person is consistently putting more energy, attention, and emotional investment into the relationship than the other. And while it may not always show up as conflict, it does show up in how the relationship feels. It starts to feel heavier for one person, easier for the other. In this episode, we're going to break down what the effort gap actually is, why people stay in it, and what it really means for your relationship. Because this isn't just about effort, it's about compatibility, boundaries, and emotional alignment. The effort gap is essentially an imbalance in how much each person is contributing to the relationship. One person is constantly showing up while the other is more passive or reactive. It's not always intentional, but it creates a noticeable difference in energy. You might see it in communication where one person is always the one reaching out first, or in planning where one person takes the lead while the other goes along with whatever is suggested. Over this creates a dynamic where one person feels responsible for basically maintaining the relationship. And that responsibility can become really heavy because relationships aren't, they're meant to be shared, not carried by one person alone. When that balance is off, it changes how both people are experiencing the connection. This imbalance, it can show up in very subtle ways at first. One person sends a good morning text, follows up in conversations, and makes sure that things don't fall off. The other person responds, but rarely initiates. It can also show up in emotional labor. So one partner is checking in, asking deeper questions, and trying to maintain connection, while the other stays more surface level. That creates a difference in emotional depth within the relationship. So at first, it may not seem like a big deal, but over time, those small patterns, they end up adding up. And what once felt manageable starts to feel one-sided. So why do people stay in this dynamic? Even when they feel that imbalance, a big part of it is hope. People believe that if they just keep showing up, the other person will eventually meet them at that level. There's also fear of losing the relationship, fear of being alone, fear that asking for more will push the other person away. So instead of addressing the imbalance directly, they try to compensate for it. And sometimes people confuse effort with love. They believe that giving more is what makes the relationship work. But over time, that mindset can lead to burnout rather than connection. This is where it connects back to what we talked about in the previous episode, and that's emotional safety. You can feel safe in a relationship and still experience an effort gap. The absence of conflict doesn't mean there's balance. Comfort can actually hide in balance. If one person is willing to carry more, the relationship can continue without obvious issues. But underneath that comfort, there's often a growing disconnect. Safety without reciprocity creates a dynamic where one person feels secure and the other feels stretched. And that imbalance eventually has to be addressed. In most effort gap dynamics, there's what we can call an overfunctioner. This is the person who is consistently doing more to maintain the relationship. They're the ones initiating, checking in, trying to keep things emotionally connected. Overfunctioners often feel responsible for the health of the relationship. They believe that if they stop putting in effort, that everything is going to suddenly fall apart. So they keep giving and giving, even when it starts to feel draining. But over time, this creates exhaustion because no matter how much one person gives, it doesn't create balance. It just widens the gap. And that's where the emotional toll begins to show. So we also have, on the other side, there's the underfunctioner, the person who is doing less. This doesn't always come from bad intentions. Sometimes they simply don't feel the same urgency or emotional need to maintain the relationship at that level. But the reality is they benefit from the imbalance. The relationship continues because the other person, there's no immediate pressure for them to change. So over time, this is going to create a dynamic where one person adapts while the other overextends. And, the one that's under functioning, they remain comfortable. So we're adapting and overextending while the other person is just comfy. And without awareness or accountability, that pattern tends to repeat itself. One of the most important things to understand about the effort gap is that resentment doesn't always show up loudly. It often builds quietly over time. At first, it may feel like mild frustration or disappointment, but as the pattern continues, it turns person doing starts to feel eventually that resentment can lead to withdrawal, not because the person doesn't care. Don't get it mistaken, that may not be the case, but honestly because they're tired. And by that point, the relationship is already under strain. A lot of people, they try to solve the effort gap through communication. Now, for those of you that have been watching my show for a while, know how much I love communication. Communication is lubrication. That's what I've said on some of the other episodes that talked more about anatomy. However, and communication is something that I talk about during every episode, really, because it's normally one of the biggest factors when it comes to keeping a relationship stable. In this case, a lot of people try to solve the effort gap through communication. They express how they feel, they ask for more effort, and hope things will change, which is all good. Communication is important. And sometimes they do for a short period of time. Things do change. But if the underlying dynamic isn't addressed, the pattern usually returns. One person adjusts temporarily, then slips back into old habits. And the other person ends up feeling like they're having the same conversation over and over again. That's because this isn't just a communication issue. It's a behavioral pattern. And patterns don't change without consistent awareness and effort from not just one, but both people. So, compatibility versus effort. This is where we have to ask a deeper question. Is this an effort issue, or is it a compatibility issue? Because sometimes people aren't aligned in how they show up in relationships. One person may value emotional connection, communication, as I do, and consistent, perhaps at a higher level, same way. And that difference creates the imbalance. You can't force someone into a level of effort that doesn't come naturally to them. And recognizing that difference is important because it helps you decide whether the relationship can actually meet your needs. One of the biggest contributors to the effort gap is overgiving without boundaries. And boundaries is something else that I have mentioned quite a bit before on this show. Boundaries and communication. I feel like I talk about that a lot. When one person continues to give and give without limits, it allows the imbalance to continue. So boundaries are what reveal the truth of the relationship. When you stop overcompensating, you get to see what the other person is actually willing to contribute. This doesn't mean withdrawing in a reactive way. I'm not saying that at all. It just means being intentional. So pulling back your effort slightly, that can create space for the other person to step up. And if they don't, that gives you important information. So healthy relationships, let me go back on my slide here so you can see this. Healthy relationships are built on reciprocity. That doesn't mean everything is perfectly equal all the time, but there is a sense of balance over time. Both people initiate, both people show emotional presence, both people take responsibility for maintaining the connection. That shared effort creates a relationship that feels supportive rather than draining. When reciprocity is present, you don't have to question where you stand. The effort is visible and it feels mutual. That's what creates stability and fulfillment at the same time. At some point, it is important to reevaluate the relationship. At some point, if the effort gap continues despite communication, despite awareness, and attempts to create balance, that's something to take seriously. If you consistently feel drained, unfulfilled, or like you're carrying the relationship, that's not something to ignore. Those feelings are signals, they're not overreactions. Reevaluation doesn't mean ending the relationship, but it does mean being honest about whether your needs are being met. And that honesty is necessary for any real change to happen. There's a few questions that can help bring clarity to this situation. If you're someone watching this or listening to this, these are some questions that you can ask yourself if this is resonating with you. Am I overcompensating for something that isn't being matched? Is the effort in this relationship consistent from both sides? Another important question is, what happens if I stop doing as much? Does the relationship maintain itself, or does it start to fall apart? That answer can be very revealing. These questions aren't about blame either. They're about awareness. And the more honest you are with yourself, the easier it becomes to decide what's right for you. The effort gap is one of the clearest indicators of what's actually happening in a relationship. It shows you where the balance is, where it's not, and what each person is contributing over time. Love is not meant to feel like one-sided labor. It's meant to feel mutual, intentional, and supported from both sides. And when that balance is missing, it's worth paying attention to. If this episode resonated with you and you're starting to look at your relationships a little differently, you're not alone. And this is exactly the kind of conversation that we continue over on Patreon. I offer deeper insights, real life applications, and exclusive content to help you navigate intimacy, communication, and connection in a more intentional way. You can also book a one-on-one session with me if you're looking for personalized guidance in your own relationship dynamics. So, as always, please stay curious, stay intentional, and stay safe.